to introduce our first speaker of the evening. Brother Johannes Maertens is a missionary monk who founded the Maria Skobtsova house in Calais in France during the time of the refugee camp called the Jungle, and he worked for 4 years in Calais with refugees. Nowadays, Johannes is at the London Catholic Worker, working with some of the young refugees that came from Calais, and he lives in a community with homeless and destitute refugees.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you for having us and giving us this opportunity to talk about and to share the experience we had in Calais. I think maybe to start, the situation today in Calais is in a way much worse than it was before. The camp, and you saw the images of the camp, was a very difficult place sometimes. And I remember when I first arrived in Calais, there were around 2,000 refugees that lived in the camp. By the end of that period, it started, if I'm not mistaken, in March 2015, and the camp was demolished in October 2016. And at the end of the camp, there were almost 10,000 refugees living in the camp. But I think back then people, they always tried to get into the UK by getting in a truck or getting in a car, in the back of a car, in a caravan. And that was the way people were trying to get to the UK. We always were thinking about someday somebody is going to try to get across in these small boats like they do on the Mediterranean. But the circumstances on the channel are quite different than the Mediterranean. To start with, the water is much colder. The English Channel is one of the most busiest shipping routes in the world. If I'm not mistaken, there's around 600 ships every day that go through the channel. So it's quite a dangerous route, like the Mediterranean is dangerous, of course. And we sometimes talked with refugees about their safety, and most refugees did not want to try to use a boat again. They had been on the Mediterranean, they had taken that risk, and they had seen how many had died. So they were not very eager to do what refugees today try to cross with small boats. You know, I have spoken in the UK with people who recently arrived in the UK on the small boats, and one thing they all say, I wouldn't do it a second time. They say it's very dangerous, it's scary, it is cold. But why do they take this risk? Because the situation they come from in their countries back home, whether it be Eritrea, Ethiopia, Iran, Afghanistan, Syria, the situation they're living in is quite very bad, and people are driven away from their countries. Once they are in Europe, they are looking for a place where it's safe to build community, where it's safe to rebuild their life. And one of the things that attracts them to the UK, one of the things that they feel they need to be in the UK, is because they often have either family or community here in this country. They know that in the UK they can get a job, although COVID makes it very difficult now. And their hope is in rebuilding their life here because they need a welcoming community. And you won't hear me say that in France that is not possible, but the experience they have in France, the first experience they get when they are in Italy is very hostile. Greece is sometimes very hostile. And there are certainly Greek people and Italian people who welcome them and who volunteer and try to help them. But that hostile experience, plus the fact that often there is not so much work in those countries, makes them come to other countries in Europe. In France, in Calais, the situation is quite hard. The mayor does everything possible to disencourage people from being there and coming there. And so it's a very hostile environment for refugees. If you go to Calais and you see the presence, the omnipresence of the CRS, which is the French riot police, the gendarmes, the police, at one time there were more than 1,500 CRS only for the refugees. So it creates a hostile environment. It creates a very precarious circumstances to live in. You saw the pictures. Well, today it is worse. In the camp there were facilities. There were minimal facilities, but at least they had a community of themselves that people were taken care of more or less. But today, all these little camps that are built today, every week they're destroyed again. And so the situation today in Calais is very bad. And it drives people even more to go on these small boats, on these small rubber boats, and take that risk. I didn't know that I was going to be the first speaker, so I actually had planned something different to talk about. And I also would like to say this. When I talk about Calais, and when I talk about the experience that volunteers had in Calais, and I hope there are some volunteers joining us today or this evening on this Zoom conference. People who went and volunteered in Calais, they often had a very special experience. The first thing we think about when we say refugees in Calais, we think about the migration crisis. But for me, when I went to Calais and I was welcomed there by the refugees in the camp, the experience showed me that it was a hospitality crisis. We often talk about migration crisis because many refugees and migrants are coming to Europe. But the way we react and the way we receive people here says something about our way of hospitality. And I would say that Europe and us, that we are in a deep hospitality crisis, in a deep spiritual and social crisis, because the way we receive people today says a lot about how we see the other, how we see the outsider. And that says a lot about ourselves, the way we see the outsider. This is one of my favorite pictures. It actually dates back to the first year I was in Calais. This is a refugee from Syria. He's a wonderful man. He lives in France now, and he's a refugee in France. This is the day that we went to the beach. And why do I use this picture? Is because we can show all the pictures of the precarious circumstances people live in. We can show all the pictures of the hard poverty, the mud, the dust you had there, the way people had to live. But I like this picture because it shows somebody who is just like me and like you. He's a Syrian refugee that, like I said today, has rebuilt or is rebuilding his life in France. And meeting him was quite an experience because he was a very gentle man. And I met many people that were like that. Most refugees are actually just like us. But we have to open a bit our hearts and our minds to receive people and to meet them. This picture for me, it shows humanity. It shows a person behind all the figures of refugees. And why is this important? Because in Calais today, you might have heard of this a few months ago, or 1 month ago, the mayor of Calais and the prefect decided that the associations were no longer allowed to distribute food. One of the reasons that is because the distribution has to stay. The mayor wants to keep it in hands of the state. But the distribution by volunteers of food is more than just giving food. It is being there with somebody, it's talking with somebody. It is recognizing the humanity of the other person that is there. And I think we heard about all the volunteers that go to Calais quite often. And it's very important. And I think the presence of people who welcome you and the presence of people who care for you is even more important sometimes than the food and the clothes they distribute. Even if that is very important because the situation is very bad. But people in Calais, by the government, the UK government pays for it, and the French government puts it into practice, is a politics of disencouraging people. You are not welcome here. And for people coming all the way from their countries where there's war, where there's conflict, where there's dictatorship, coming here and then facing that reality, you are not welcome here. That's very hard. And that's why it's so important that there are volunteers, that there are local French people and English people and people from other countries that are there, hand out food, hand out clothes and stuff, and say, well, you are welcome here. Daniel, I hope you keep a bit an eye on my time, because I don't always have a feeling for that. This is another two wonderful pictures. The last picture is from 2019 in the small Eritrean camp called Belgian Parking. And I think actually, Alex, you made this picture. I'm not sure. And the first picture is that of the church that was in the big refugee camp in Calais. The Ethiopian and Eritrean Orthodox Church that was built there. I remember the first day that I arrived in Calais. Myself and a volunteer from this house here, a London Catholic worker, we were wondering, what can we do in Calais? And so in 2015, we traveled, we bought 2 tickets, we traveled to Calais, and we went to the refugee camp. And the first thing we did was just start talking with people. And we met a group of young Sudanese refugees. And they were quite interested in why we were there. And we started talking to them. And they welcomed us. The first thing they did was make coffee and tea for us. And we sat around the fire together to keep warm because it was quite cold. And they asked us, what are you going to do? Well, we hope to stay here for a few days and to see what we can do here for you in this camp. And they said, okay, you can stay with us. So they actually provided us with one of those little plastic houses you saw in the film. And Juanjo and I lived for like 5 days in the camp amongst the refugees, asking in a way the question, what from our movement, from the Catholic worker movement, can we do here in the camp? And on the first day, I went to that little church and I wanted to do my prayer, my noon prayer. And I went into the chapel, but I couldn't pray. I sat down on my knees and no words came out of my mouth because I had seen so much poverty, so much hardship, people living in that dust or in the mud, living in those little plastic houses. And it was quite overwhelming to see that kind of poverty. And that we do this to people who come from war zones, people who come from conflict and dictatorship. That is the way that we receive people. But I also was deeply touched by the fact that they welcomed me and gave me a place to live with them. But no words came over my lips. The next day, I went early in the morning to the church to do my morning prayer. And I found words to pray, and I found my words also in my book. But after that prayer, I opened my eyes again. And on my left side, there were some young women, Eritrean, Ethiopian, praying. And on the other side, there were some men praying. And that is how it's done in the Orthodox Church. And I opened my eyes and I said, oh, they pray the same prayers as I do, the same way, and although different. And I said, these are my brothers and my sisters. And I understood at that moment that I had to stay in Calais, that God had more or less called me to be present amongst my brothers and my sisters. And that is, in the second day when I was there in the church, I decided I'm going to stay here and I'm going to live and work amongst the refugees in the camp. But it's that experience of they welcoming us. You go there to help them, and the first thing you do is giving you tea and coffee. And Alex can confirm that, because in the second picture that you see, every time we entered the camp, they would chop wood, they would heat water, they would make tea and coffee for us. They would share their meal in the morning or in the evening. They always would welcome us. Whether you came with bags of material to help them, or you came with empty pockets, as it were, just to say hello, the first thing they would do is ask whether you would like coffee or tea. And that was a deep experience for me in experiencing that hospitality, which I found that we didn't have anymore for the outsider. A small anecdote in the same line. When the police, the CRS, started demolishing the camp, there was resistance, but there was also something else. When the police arrived in the Sudanese area of the camp to destroy it, the first thing that the Sudanese refugees did was bring coffee and tea to the police to welcome them. They knew they were going to destroy it. They knew that was a fact that was going to happen. But still, that hospitality, that welcoming for them was an important part of their life, their culture. And I think this is something I have learned and been deeply touched by working in the Calais camp. On my left side, you see our tea urn and sandwiches, and we used to go out into the camps, the little camps later. This is in what used to be the Green Hotel. We call this the Green Hotel. Danny, you were there yourself. This is an area where mostly young Eritrean refugees would camp out into the grasslands, into the bushes. This area now is not accessible anymore. The city completely locked it off with gates, so that refugees cannot camp there anymore. And that's something they constantly do in the city. So areas where refugees live, the mayor puts gates around it. She closes everything off. On the other side, they're preparing, I think it's Shirio. It's an Ethiopian, a very nice, good Ethiopian dish. It's one of my favorite dishes. And looking at the pot, I would say that was in the Belgian parking amongst the Eritrean community. And I think Alex also made this picture. Yeah. This is Maria Skobtsova house as it is, living community of refugees and volunteers living together. And this is breakfast. This is called fata, prepared by the young men themselves. Maria Skobtsova house started in the first year of the camp as a house of emergency hospitality. So in the first year, we were mainly focused on taking people from the refugee camp who were in an emergency situation, being people who had come back from hospital, people who were sick, people who were seriously thinking of asking asylum in France, but needed some respite, needed some rest, people who felt unsafe on the street or in the camp. Many hundreds of refugees came through that house of hospitality. I would say the thing that made the house and still makes it is also that it's a spiritual house. It is, Maria Skobtsova house is called after an Orthodox saint who worked with migrants in France. At the heart of that house has always been prayer. And one of the many times that I enjoyed, and I know Alex enjoyed it too, is that during years in the evening, refugees would lead the evening prayer. They would pray mostly in either Tigrinya or Amharic in the house, and we would do a part in English or French. And that prayer was part of the heart of the house and the heart of the work that we did. Living and working with refugees in Calais has been for us and for all the volunteers that came through the house also a very deeply spiritual experience. This last picture is very recent, like you see, it's from September this year. It's not in France, it is in London. Feven and I went to meet a group of young refugees, mostly young refugees, that had actually recently arrived in the UK. So some were there for a few weeks, some were there for a month. This is, in a way, you could say they have arrived in the UK. But for many refugees, this is not the end point, because arriving in the UK, the environment in the UK when they arrive is also not always so easy. They're put in dispersal centers, they have to go through the system. But at least here, at this moment in this picture, they're safe. They're away from the camp, they're away from the dangers of the sea or from the lorries. and hopefully with them, and we can start rebuilding their lives.
Thank you, Johannes. So much to think about there. There always is. Whenever you speak, I never grow tired of listening to you. Just a reminder, folks, any questions, any thoughts that you've had, please do put them in the chat, start to collect them, so we can start to feed them back, because if not, it will just be me asking Johannes and Alex questions, and they both deserve much better than that. They've both been through that experience. They don't wish to repeat it. Our second speaker is Alex Holmes. Alex lives in Angus, here in Scotland on the East Coast, and he works as a letter carver working in the medium of stone. His engagement with refugees and asylum seekers was triggered when he spent 3 months in 2016 as a human rights observer in Palestine with the Ecumenical Accompaniment Program in Palestine and Israel. While there, he saw the media coverage of the situation for refugees in the old jungle in Calais. This caught his attention, and on his return from the West Bank, curiosity led him to Calais. He volunteered for a month with Care for Calais, and while there, he discovered the Skobtsova house whilst trying to find safe sanctuary for a group of young Eritreans who had returned to the area after the demolition of the jungle. And in his own words, he has been returning to volunteer in the house ever since. Alex, over to you.
Thanks, Danny, very much. It's lovely to be here and have the opportunity to talk about Calais. And it's been a truly enriching experience in my life. And as Danny pointed out, there's a kind of trajectory of Claire, who sadly couldn't be here tonight. When I was a volunteer working with her and other volunteers, I met Johannes and was immediately attracted to the Skobtsova house that he had established in Calais. And so I've been going back there ever since. And I had actually planned to have been there. I'd hoped to have been on this Zoom from Calais, but as everybody knows, it's very difficult to plan anything these days. And listen, I mean, and Johannes gave a very good and graphic and detailed description of Calais and the life that refugees live there and the encounters that he and other volunteers had with the refugee community. And there's two words that come to mind when I was thinking about that one. Johannes mentioned hospitality. And the thing I love about the word hospitality is the Latin etymology of that word is hospes, which is the Latin word for both guest and host. So that sense of hospitality, it's a mutual thing. It's a giving and a receiving, and hospitality is essential, an essential element to what the house offers, Skobtsova House, and what volunteers offer and receive when they're out amongst the refugee community. And the other word I've become increasingly aware of, and I think is particularly poignant in the work that many volunteers do, and particularly my own experience, is the word accompaniment. And again, that has the beautiful etymology of cum pane, with bread. It's sharing bread with people. It's just being alongside people as, without wanting to sound corny, as an equal brother and a sister to the refugee community that we meet. I'm going to give a little reflection and with a backdrop of a few photographs. And then the title of this reflection I've given Home Means Sanctuary. The place where we are living is very dangerous. We scare the people of this city, very racist. Yeah, the place is very terrible. I don't know what we can do. This is the UK. This is now. This is a young Eritrean called Dawit who messaged me from Folkestone, from Napier Barracks, which the Home Office has just opened up about 5 or 6 weeks ago as one of 2 ex-army camps to accommodate asylum seekers. And Dawit went on, coronavirus pandemic situation speaking, we are in dangerous conditions because around 25 persons sleeping in one room. On Sunday, the 11th of October, there was a headline in the Sunday Observer, revealed the squalor inside ex-MOD camps being used to house refugees. And a week later, just 10 days ago, on the 17th of October, there was a rally in Folkestone outside Napier Barracks as a gesture of support for the refugees who were living there. and the gates were locked, so the people, the refugees, the asylum seekers on inside couldn't get out to join the gesture of support. But there was, in the papers the next day, there was one of the participants at this gesture of support said this: "The migrants have been demonized and dehumanized on the internet by far-right groups. They are treated as if they are just one. Some people refer to them like they are animals when they are human beings, and each of them has their own story. It really concerns me," he went on, "and I can understand why they are leaving their countries." Next slide, please, Danny. I can understand why they are leaving their countries. Eritrea, 2014. On the 20th of June, soldiers came to my house when I was sleeping with my twin siblings and mother. My home area is very hot and there are no walls, only a fence and a very weak door made of straw and wood. They came and grabbed me from my bed and beat me badly. Then they put me in a car and took me away. For over a month, I was subjected to continuous interrogation and beaten. I became very weak from the beatings and unable to walk. Abel's crime: he was accused of planning to leave the country and evade military service. And he vehemently denied this accusation, but eventually he was tortured into making a confession. 3 years ago, the PEN International, the writers, the Worldwide Writers Organization, they commissioned an Eritrean writer, an activist called Eyob Tekle, to compile a report about his country. And he entitled his report, "Eritrea, a Muzzled State." He wrote this: "The Eritrean population has been subject to grave human rights violations at the hands of the regime. These include slavery and forced labor under the pretext of endless military national service, religious persecution, extrajudicial killing, disappearances, arbitrary arrest, incommunicado detention," and the list goes on and on and on. Amazingly, Abel was able to escape the military prison he was in Eritrea, and he set out for Europe. And as with the majority of migrants leaving their country in sub-Saharan Africa, he ended up in Libya, where once again he was detained in a trafficker's prison and tortured. And he finally reached Europe and headed for Switzerland, where his sister had lived legally for many years. The Swiss refused him asylum, so his next best bet, he decided, was to try and get to the UK. And Abel twice made it to the UK and was twice deported to Switzerland. And anyway, wonderfully, third time lucky, he's the only person I've ever met on a hat trick. So third time lucky, he now has refugee status in the UK. He has a passport and a place he can call home. And what is home? I asked him recently. That's an amazing question, Abel replied. Home means sanctuary. Sanctuary, a place of refuge, a place of rest, a place of peace where you can feel safe. Next slide, Danny, please. Calais, last winter, beside the Eritrean camp. And this is Dawit again, who I quoted at the beginning of this little reflection. Dawit, who's now in the barracks in Folkestone. But this was him writing last winter. "Every 2 days, the police come to take our tents, but we take them away before the police come. But if we don't take them, they take the tent and the person, the owner of the tent, to a detention center. And CRS, that's the French riot police, they always hit people, they break phones, they also spray gas on us. Sit, come and drink coffee." So I sat round the fire with them, and paper cups are filled, as Johannes has referred to, that wonderful hospitality. Paper cups are filled with incredibly sweet black coffee and passed around the circle, around the fire. And the winter night is now a glare of spotlights. Around us, kilometers of concrete wall and fences and surveillance cameras, which you can see in that image there. And you can just see that's the wall disappearing into the distance. and the tents you can probably just make out kind of along the pathway a bit against the wall. This is Calais. It's like a vast open air prison. I hate this life. Stop thinking too much, just chill. Too much cold. Wife is life. A stream of consciousness in English tossed into the Tigrinya chat around the fire, Tigrinya being the main language spoken by the Eritreans. These days there are expressions of despair. So many of this community have been shunted around Europe, their requests for asylum rejected. Why does nobody want us, they ask? Why is there no love and respect in Europe? And it's that why does nobody want us that you hear again and again. And I even hear it here in the UK, and it's something that drives me back again and again to Calais. When I hear people here in Scotland, people I know, friends of mine, who say to me, the truth is nobody wants these people. Why does nobody want us, they ask? Why is there no love and respect in Europe? The seasons pass, summer now, same place and around the fire. This was just this last summer. And Joel hands me his phone for me to read his favourite poem, For the Traveller by John O'Donoghue. Every time you leave home, another road takes you into a world you were never in, begins the poem. It ends with the words, return home more enriched. But where is home, I ask Joel. What is home? And he thinks for a little while, and he decides, home, he says, is where I can be myself. The wind is strong. The wind always seems to be blowing in Calais. And this so-called security wall, which was funded by our government, the wind is strong, funneled by the security wall and snaking into the distance. At the foot of the wall, squat, sagging tents. Mahawi, his back to the wall, is telling me a story. His English is fluent. Once upon a time, his story begins, there was a rich young man who owned a huge, big mansion with many, many bedrooms. And one day he decides to ask Jesus to come and live in his house with him. So when Jesus arrives, the man offers him the very best room in the house. This room is all yours, Jesus. He says, stay as long as you want. So Jesus moves into the best bedroom. And then trouble began. Night after night, there was banging at the door, and this angry mob were desperately trying to break into the house, smashing the windows, and the young man had to use all his strength just to stop them breaking in. And eventually he spoke to Jesus. I don't understand, he said to Jesus. These last nights, I've had to use all my strength. I've had to fight to keep this mob from breaking, these crazy demons from trying to break into my house. While you were sleeping, I thought that once I invited you into the house to live with me, that you would take care of me. I love you and care for you, replied Jesus. But when you invited me to come here and stay, you gave me this lovely room, but you shut the door to the rest of your house. I am the Lord of this room, but I am not master of this house. I have protected this room, and no demon may enter here. Jesus, please forgive me, said the young man. Please, please forgive me. Take all my house, it's yours. I want you to have control of everything. And after that, no more angry demons, no more angry mobs came trying to break into his house, and his door was open to everyone who needed shelter. And the next day I went down to say goodbye to the guys because I was coming back to the UK, and there was no sign of Mahawi. And at midday I get a message. I'm in Birmingham, Alex. Yesterday I got into a truck and I'm now in the UK. The door had opened for him. And we're in touch regularly. I'm in touch with him most weeks. And I asked him recently, I said to him, Mahawi, what for you? What is your understanding of home? What is home? And he said, home for me is a family with love and happiness. I hope for this. I really hope for this. And recently his solicitor was in touch with me, and she wrote this, Mahawi is very traumatized. We've asked the Home Office for an interview and commissioned a supporting letter from Freedom from Torture to argue he should be treated very carefully at the interview as a vulnerable adult and not asked many questions. What he and others suffered in Eritrea and Libya will continue haunting them for years. Next slide, please, Danny. I want to end with these very, very powerful words from a young Iranian woman, Farina. And incidentally, I've changed all the names in this reflection. Farina is a young Iranian woman who I met in Calais this year. She was living in Maria Skobtsova house. And suddenly out of the blue, I knew she'd got to the UK and she was in a hotel where many, many people are placed these days. And suddenly out of the blue last week, she messaged me. She said in her message, "Now I have a room in UK. They transfer me to home." "What is home?" I asked her. "What is home?" she replied. "Some people believe that home is where we live. When you tell them where is home, they give the home address. It has never been like this for me. If I'd been asked this question as a teenager, I would have answered that cuddling and staying between your lover's arms with safety, peace and love and a sense of belonging feels your home. But later I changed my mind. What if you can't hug or hold your lover's hand in the street? Because the police will arrest both of you for this. You may laugh at my definition of home, but if you were born in the country I was in, Iran, with Islamic government, you would realize that every single one of these sentences is an unattainable dream. For me, home is a place where you can easily hold or kiss your lover, even in the street. Home is a place where you can freely choose or change your religion. You can easily get acquainted with other religions and decide for yourself what religion you want to have. Home is a place where you'll not be afraid of losing your life, your job, and your family if you have changed your religion. Home is a place where if you do not believe in hijab, you can freely take off your scarf without being sent to jail for at least 10 years. Home is a place where you can ride a bike or a motorcycle without fear of being arrested by the police. Home means you can easily worship a kind father, more kind than any earthly father, and introduce him to your friends without fear of punishment or death. Home means a place of peace and love. Home is a place where you smile when you think about it. I hope everyone finds their home. Thank you, Danny.
Thank you, Alex. That is absolutely amazing. I heard about Alex about 1,000 times before I ever actually had the pleasure of meeting him. When I visited Skobtsova House, both with Justice and Peace Scotland and as a volunteer, I used to hear so much about this Alex, who I'd never met. And then he emailed our office several times, and I felt like I knew him, and then we finally met once. It's always amazing to have the opportunity to hear from him again and again. We're going to capture some of the questions. I'm just doing everything I can to put both Alex and Johannes into the spotlights. Again, thank you. Please do keep questions coming. And there is quite a few of them, so I'm going to have to go scroll all the way back up to find where we started from. So, first question which I found, I think it's the first one, is from Roslyn. And I think it came in just after your talk, Johannes, but Alex, I know you'll both have something to say here. It says the pictures showed mainly young men. Are they the majority? Are there many women and children? Are there older people in Calais? So perhaps your experience when you were there and most recently, what are the sort of demographics in play?
It's a question that is often asked, and which is normal because the images we get on television is mostly of the men and the young men. To start with, in Calais and Dunkirk, there are quite also different images. So it depends a bit also from which country people come. So if many people who come from Eritrea and Ethiopia would mostly be young men and some young women. I think when the mothers and the fathers get older, it becomes quite difficult to flee because you have to go through the desert, you have to go through Sudan and Libya, and from a certain age, I don't think that is possible anymore. So specifically for Eritrea, the youngsters are sent from a young age away, and the reason is very simple. In Eritrea, men and women, well, young boys and girls, are forced to go into the army. And often the families send them away before this forced subscription happens. So that means sometimes they're 14, 15 years when they leave their home and their home countries. They have to leave a bit, I mean, before they go into the army, because otherwise they do not know when they're leaving the army. There is no maximum time on that. And they're all sent to 1 or 2 camps where then they are put into the army. And sometimes they're in the army for years and they don't get any pay, they get nothing. It is just, it's a way of forced labor. It's really labor for the government. So mothers and fathers, families often send their youngsters away because there is no future in Eritrea. They often compare Eritrea with North Korea. Ethiopia, the people who leave Ethiopia are also quite, mostly of young age. And also many people coming from Afghanistan are from young age. Within the Iranian refugees, I have met much wider age groups. But in the journey that the Iranian refugees take is quite a different journey. They do not go to the desert, through the 2 deserts, well, it's 1 desert, 2 countries in the desert and the Mediterranean. They have a different angle of coming into Europe, which is, has different kind of challenges. In the Dunkirk camp, I saw much more, or many more, women and women with children than I saw in Calais. And that has to do with this. Dunkirk camp had more people from either Iran, Kurdistan, so Kurdistan, Iraq, or Kurdistan, Iran, Turkey, or Afghanistan. While the Calais camp was mostly, was a large mix of people from different countries, Syria, Eritrea, Ethiopia, Egypt, also from Afghanistan. And that's why the pictures sometimes show a bit a different view. Also, the population in Africa, East Africa, is much younger. It's so that the mothers and the fathers stay behind. And one of the things you often hear, I just heard it yesterday again, I miss my mother. They all miss their mothers. They all miss their families back home when they come here. They are young, and there are more men or young men than women that come here. Often it's the boys are sent first, and then they as it were try first, and then they see if the women can safely come here. It is a dangerous journey for a young man. It's even a more dangerous journey for a young woman. So that's why I think most the people we see will be young men. But we certainly have had people of all ages in the house, and I think recently, Alex, I mean, we have also older Iranian refugees, didn't we?
Yeah, and just to add, I mean, Johannes has given a very broad description of age, and the things I've noticed just over the last 2 or 3 years, particularly over the last year, there are many more women and children arriving, and that fact, the focus of the house is offering safe sanctuary to the most vulnerable, and the shift over the last 18 months has been towards women and children. And they, when I was first there and when Johannes started the house, there weren't the number of women and children in Calais that there are now. And the other thing I've noticed is, as I mentioned in the reflection, many people have got to Europe and have been there a long time and have been waiting, have applied for asylum in various countries, and they're kept waiting and waiting for a decision, and the years go by, and then they are finally rejected. So I'm noticing amongst the refugee community people who've been in Europe a long while, who they're going bald, they're with grey hair, and it's and obviously that's part to do with stress, but it's a part of being caught in endless administration delays and eventually rejected.
Thank you. Another question which has come from Marion, who is our vice chair, and literally wasn't sure she could make it tonight, so it's wonderful to have Marion with us. I think perhaps to Alex first, but I'm sure Johannes, you will have something to say as well. Question is, are the refugees aware of the deliberate hostile environment that they will encounter in England, in the UK, if they manage to get here?
I can't answer that directly. I'm very aware that when I'm spending time around the fire in Calais, and specifically with the Eritrean community where I spend time every day when I'm there. There's an incredible sense of community. And when people come here, that community is gone. They are, at the moment, people are languishing in hotels, away from their friends, away from their community. Eventually, if things go well, they're put into a house. They might be sharing a house with people from 5 or 6 different countries, and that sense. And then things have got very much worse. I mean, the UK has not had a system that's prepared itself for the great increase in number of arrivals this year, hence the opening up of these camps. I can't tell you whether their friends who've reached here are letting their friends back in Calais know how hard it is, but I'm sure that that message will be getting through. But as Johannes mentioned earlier, when people do get to the UK, even though it's now a lot harder than it used to be in the UK, there's that sense of, well, at least we're safe here. We've crossed the channel. We're on a lorry or on a boat, but there still remains that that the sense that you can be deported again. And without, I don't need to press the point that politically immigration, the powers that be that are setting the agenda for immigration in this country. It's a bit like the hostile zero tolerance atmosphere in Calais, creating Calais. It's being replicated to some degree here. So I feel to some degree people will know something of the change in attitude in the UK, in experience.
Johannes, do you have any thoughts on this?
I find it a very difficult question. Yesterday evening, I was sitting in the park, here, one of the local parks in London, and I was talking with a young homeless refugee who has now been in the UK for 2 years and has leave to remain, but he's a homeless living on the streets. And he said to me, I should have stayed in Belgium. And I don't know the answer on that question. I know a bit of his background, and I know a bit of his case. And I know that he might have had a chance to get asylum in Belgium, but he has leave to remain in the UK. And the hostile environment, like we call it in the UK, and it is certainly a hostile environment, is something that's going all over Europe. It's not just in the UK that there's a hostile environment. In other European countries, you need a good lawyer to get asylum. You need good proof of your asylum case, and the chance that you will have to go. How do you say it? That you have to repeat your case once more or twice sometimes is also quite a reality. So it's difficult to say if the hostile environment is worse here than, say, in Europe. I think refugees are aware that there is a hostile environment in Europe and in the UK, but it's difficult to say what is more difficult. Yeah.
I suppose all I'd add there, very underqualified. I know certainly when I've been with Care for Calais and when I was at Skobtsova House, people asking me about their chances. What did I think of do I think they'd get asylum? Do I think they'd be successful? A lot of the times my gut reaction hearing them was no, but I never had even the heart or the courage to actually say it, because I certainly felt in that situation I didn't want to take away hope from someone, which may be quite cowardly. So yeah, I don't think there's an easy answer. We have in the chat, there's a fascinating conversation going on about resources and the things we can do. So to try and capture some of it, we have sort of questions about how can we raise awareness in dioceses, in schools. Muriel in particular has come through a course that we're part of for the Laudato Si schools, which is a new initiative. Is there a chance to do more of this? Absolutely. People are talking about resources. Our website, Justice Peace Scotland, has a lot of resources. Alex is a regular blogger for us. and writes most beautifully. There's the Seeking Sanctuary website, which I know Phil has put into the chat and is easily found as well through Google. I suppose perhaps try and condense some of this into a question to Johannes and then to Alex. What do you think is perhaps the one thing that you would ask people here tonight to do after hearing from you, those who have had some experience of this, those who are new to it? What would be your one ask to people having heard this to try and take action to try and improve both the situation for people in Calais, but also that culture of welcome, that culture of hospitality that we seem to have lost?
Mm-hmm. I think all the small things you can do are already very important. So collecting clothes, collecting food, collecting donations, that's all very important. If you have a chance to volunteer with a local organization, and I mean Scotland, England, that is also good. I think the direct contact with refugees is very important. It's just that it's important for us to meet and to learn from refugees, to understand what it means to be a refugee. And it's important also for refugees to meet people that are there for them and welcome them. And like you heard us talk about this, I mean, it becomes a very deeply human experience to work with refugees, not only with refugees, but also with homeless people, other people. And I think that's very important. If you have the opportunity to volunteer in Calais, I think there are many organizations, there's still today many organizations on the ground that take volunteers, like Care for Calais, Maria Skobtsova House, and other associations, where you certainly can participate. I don't know what the situation is today in Calais exactly. There are times that it's easier for short-term volunteers to come and help. There are times we need more long-term volunteers. Depends a bit how the situation is and how easy the distributions are possible or not. But I would say, if you can volunteer, either locally here in the UK or in Scotland, or you can come and volunteer in Calais, take contact with an organization and they will say what you can do. But also the small things, like I said, collecting clothes, collecting food, donations are always welcome and very useful. We can use it in the UK, we can use it in Calais.
I think I would reinforce what Johannes said, and I'm thinking immediately of like my niece, when she was at Newcastle University, she got involved in teaching English to refugees. She and a nephew of mine came over to Calais and volunteered with Refugee Community Kitchen. I spoke to a young guy who's just graduated in London 2 nights ago. He's training as a solicitor, but he's volunteering at somewhere called the Injera Club in South London. I think it's that face-to-face encounter with the refugee community that can be so enriching and transforming. And then, because I think one of the real, and then you can go on spread. You can spread the word, because this whole the trajectory at the moment is to dehumanize, and the more personal encounters people have with this community that is so easily dehumanized, it's the rehumanizing, and it's so important that humanizing, that it's, again, without sounding cliche, when you meet people, you realize they're no different to you or I, that they're our brother and sister. And I think that personal contact is really important if it's possible.
And again, I'm just going out of the chat. When I was talking about resources, we will make sure a proper list is available. I did forget to mention both the London Catholic Worker and here in Glasgow, the Glasgow Catholic Worker. Both are great resources. Both the newspaper that is produced, the newsletter, and also the organisations do great work. Just put that in there, and I don't dare forget it. It's not a question directly, but one of the things coming up is looking at the situation here in Scotland. Obviously, migration, border control, these are all reserved matters to Westminster. It's been difficult for us to find our own sort of purchase on this kind of thing. But I think Alex, as the Angus native, I'm going to sort of go to you and sort of say, what would you like to see from from a Scottish context in particular that we can do to build that the culture of hospitality, to fight the crisis of hospitality?
Well, Dan, I'm going to throw that straight back to you, because you live in an urban environment. I live in rural Angus, out of touch. My contact with the outside world is, when I'm here in Scotland, is rather limited. You are at the heart of the urban belt of Scotland, and you have that link with people. You have that link with organisations. So it's not a very helpful answer, but I'm going to throw that back to you. And I think what you're doing vital stuff already. So I would just reinforce and say, what you as Justice Peace Scotland are doing in terms of awareness is really, really important, like working with schools and things.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, Alex. I'm just trying to think of other groups who we know. Certainly, for those who in Scotland who may be not aware or further afield, we have SFAR, Scottish Faith Action for Refugees, which started up in 2015 with the Syrian resettlement scheme, and has really become an amazing group for spearheading and leading on a lot of this stuff. And again, their contact details, if you Google, so they're very findable, or get in touch with us. We can certainly do that, because they do a lot of work, as is going on really around the country. There are more questions. The sort of conversation and the link to SFAR has suddenly appeared in the chat, thanks to David, who does amazing work and really has led on that. So yeah, the link is there. I think we're probably coming down to one last question, and I'm perhaps going to go away from some of what's being discussed in the chat. I suppose I'd say to each of you, obviously, Justice and Peace Scotland is an organisation as part of the Catholic Church in Scotland, and the Catholic worker tradition, again, the same is rooted in that. We've seen just the other week, obviously, Fratelli Tutti, this new encyclical from Pope Francis on solidarity. What would you hope? I don't know, I've not checked with either of you if you had a chance to read it yet, but what would you hope would be the takeaway? What would you hope the Church could learn from Fratelli Tutti, from the example of Pope Francis, particularly when we're looking at this issue of hospitality and the borders of the UK? So we'll go Alex first, and then Johannes.
Okay. Well, again, I haven't made the time to sit down and read the latest encyclical. But what I would say, I mean, the whole emphasis of, or a critical emphasis of Pope Francis's papacy has been on hospitality and reaching out to the marginalized. I mean, and for me, I think he's set a tone for the Catholic Church that is radical and transformative and incredibly welcome, and especially in this global world at the moment of increased fences, increased rejection of the marginalized. I mean, I think his is a very, very important voice speaking up for those who society tends to reject. And I really welcome, I'm looking forward to reading. I just haven't had time to read the new encyclical. But yeah, it's setting a mood music, as it were, mood music, which I think is absolutely vital at the moment in these polarized times.
Yes, I had a look at it when it came out, and it's a very important document. I think it fits within the three encyclicals now that came out from Pope Francis, where he points us out that the world is in a deep crisis. We have the migration and hospitality crisis. We have the climate change and everything that has to do with nature as a crisis. And Pope Francis linked that in his last text with COVID. I mean, the world is in a deep crisis. And I would like to refer back to one of the earlier questions that came up from Catherine. If this is a hospitality crisis and not a refugee crisis, how do we in Europe recover the virtue of hospitality? I think before I went to Calais, I wouldn't have known so much how to answer on this question, because I've learned something in Calais, and I've learned something deeply spiritual. Also, we're now working back in the UK, working with refugees here. Even when most of our refugee friends live in hard circumstances and in poverty, and they live there in the camps or here in the streets in London, somehow they are always able to thank God. And I remember, Alex, I don't know if you probably remember this too, but sometimes they would come back home to Maria Skobtsova house after a day that they either had problems with the CRS, with the police, or they had fallen from a truck, yet they would thank God. They would either go into the chapel and have a short moment of prayer. They would say, thank God I'm still alive, thank God. And not just thank God, but really also be thankful for what they have and for their life. And I think this is one of the things in the West, in Western Europe, that we have lost. To be thankful for what we have, and to be thankful for the day when it starts, when we wake up, and to appreciate the life that we have. I think this is my personal view, but a big part of the hospitality crisis and the migration crisis, and also the climate crisis, has to do with the fact that today we are not easily happy with what we have. We always want more. We always want more for ourselves. And that has pushed us in a deep spiritual crisis. And that's what also in a way I read a bit in the documents of Pope Francis is we have to learn to appreciate and be more thankful for what we have and what we can do in this world. And I think a lot of fear of refugees, fear of the other, is actually fear that we will lose the privileges we have, that we will lose all the things we have around us. And it's in a way also a bit of greed. And I think what I've learned from working with refugees is to be more thankful every day in my life, to thank God for all the small things that make my life also beautiful. And it's maybe strange saying that as a monk coming from, I mean, people would maybe expect that you have that, but I also, in a product of my culture. And like I said, I learned a bit about hospitality from them. And I learned also about being thankful for what you have in your life from them. Yeah, I would like to leave it there.
I'd just like to add something, and because Johannes emphasized that spiritual side of the community that we've met in Calais. And I noticed Bishop Nolan, his face has appeared on the screen, and we had a little exchange a couple of years ago. And I remember you saying, Bishop, that what a gift that these young people will bring with with their deep faith. If these young people manage to get to the UK, what a gift they will bring to the UK society. I've never forgotten what you said that time, Bishop.
Alex is doing what he always does and stealing my spotlight. We are going to start to wrap up there. We are unfortunately coming to the end of our time together. We are going to end the evening with a moment of prayer, and it is going to be led by Bishop Nolan, who is with us, who is Bishop of Galloway and the Bishop President of Justice and Peace Scotland. So just before that, and so we will close in prayer and then end for the evening. Just before, I want to say on behalf of Justice and Peace Scotland, a massive thank you to F1 for coming this evening, for giving up your time and for being here and joining us. And on our behalf, and I'm sure on yours as well, a massive thank you to Alex and to Johannes for being with us, for sharing their experiences, their insights. It's not a secret. I already think that they're amazing people, and I'm sure I'm not the only one who's going to have that thought as we leave this evening. As we have said, Claire from KEF Calais hasn't been able to be with us this evening, but do please keep her and the work of the volunteers at KEF Calais in your prayers as well. If you don't, please do feel free to follow and support Justice and Peace Scotland. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and our website, justiceandpeacescotland.org.uk. Keep you up to date on all our latest campaigns, events, and everything else that we do. So again, I've suddenly lost him. I'm going to ask Bishop Nolan if he can unmute himself. He has. Super. And we're going to end with a period of prayer. Thank you, everyone, for coming.
just before we begin our prayer, it has been mentioned about the deaths in the Channel this morning. 4 people at least have died, including 2 children, a 5-year-old and an 8-year-old. So let's remember them in our prayers and remember the many who have died, particularly not just crossing the Channel, but particularly trying to cross the Mediterranean, have given up their lives because of that. And we entrust them to the mercy of God, and they have finally reached their eternal home where they're sure of a warm welcome, which doesn't get here in Europe or in the UK. The 27th of September was the World Day of Prayer for Migrants and Refugees, and Pope Francis wrote a prayer for that day, so I think we'll end by saying that prayer. Father, you entrusted to St. Joseph what you held most precious, the child Jesus and his mother, in order to protect them from the dangers and threats of the wicked. Grant that we may experience his protection and help. May he who shared in the sufferings of those who flee from the hatred of the powerful console and protect all our brothers and sisters driven by war, poverty, and necessity to leave their homes and their lands to set out as refugees for safer places. Help them, through intercession of St. Joseph, to find the strength to persevere. Give them comfort in sorrows and courage amid their trials. Grant to those who welcome them some of the tender love of this just and wise Father who loved Jesus as their true Son and sustained Mary at every step of the way. May he who earned his bread by the work of his hands watch over those who have seen everything in life taken away and obtain for them the dignity of a job and the serenity of a home. We ask this through Jesus Christ, your Son, whom St. Joseph saved by fleeing to Egypt and trusting in the intercession of the Virgin Mary, whom he loved as a faithful husband in accordance with your will. Amen. And may God's peace and blessing be with us and to all who seek shelter and a home and a warm welcome from others. We make our prayer through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Thank you, Bishop Nolan. Thank you so much, everyone. We just had a question. Will the recording be made available? We will make the recording available. We'll share details with that, and certainly go Justice and Peace Scotland website. If in doubt, go to the website and you will find everything you need there. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a good evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Danny. Thank you.
Thank you.